תל אביב, יא חביבי תל אביב, תסתכל כמה לירדים מסביב, עושים לי היי היי בלילה וואי וואי, וסחטן על תל אביב. תל אביב, יא חביבי תל אביב, תסתכל כמה לירדים מסביב, עושים לי היי היי בלילה וואי וואי, וסחטן על תל אביב. תל אביב, יא חביבי תל אביב, תסתכל כמה לירדים מסביב, עושים לי היי היי בלילה וואי וואי, וסחטן על תל אביב.
So by the mid-1880s, the first Jews are leaving that ancient city of Jaffa and creating what would become the first Jewish suburb in the land of Israel, maybe even in the world, Neve Tzedek. By the beginning of the 20th century, already needing to expand, those Jews are going to gather themselves, turn to the Ottoman Turks, say, we want to purchase those sand dunes just south of Jaffa, and the Ottomans say, fine by us. Ultimately, in the year 1909, 66 families are going to leave Neve Tzedek and come and stand actually where we're standing right now. And they will gather for a lottery. And they will have sent the kids down to the shore to collect shells, dark shells and light shells, and they'll write the names of the families on one and the plot numbers on the other, and they'll choose in this way, they'll distribute all the plots of land. And of those who are choosing at this lotto is going to be a gentleman by the name of Meir Dizengoff. Now Meir's mother knew what he was going to be when he grew up, because Meir became the first what of the city of Tel Aviv? The first mayor, of course. Not only that, it's known that he liked to ride around on his female horse. What's a female horse? A mayor. So Meir Dizengoff. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, we know that Meir Dizengoff is going to choose, and his plot of land is actually going to be right over here. Now, I know that building doesn't look like much now. It's actually going through some renovations, and in a moment we'll recognize that beyond it being the very first house that will be built here on this sand dune, which actually turns into a main boulevard, which becomes the first main boulevard of the city of Tel Aviv to be called Rothschild Street. Beyond that, that home will have a historic moment in time that in a sense will be the watershed moment in modern times for the Jewish people. We'll get to that in a moment. And as you can imagine, the guy you saw on the horse, well, indeed, that is Meir Dizengoff on his mayor. Now, that group of people that starts that city in 1909 will first be called Achuzat Bait, or let's say a homestead. They will soon change that name to become known as Tel Aviv. So why Tel Aviv? Where does that come from? Well, that brings us to our friend Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism. Actually not. In fact, he would be the first one to say he is not the father of Zionism. In fact, everything he said, he would have said, has already been said by others before him. He was perhaps the father of what would be known as political Zionism. Back in 1897, convening the first World Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, it will be there that he will say, actually right after it's done, if not in 5 years, definitely in 50 years, there'll be a Jewish state. He says that in 1897, 1947, the UN says yes to a partition plan, 50 years to the year. Was he a prophet, a visionary? Did he just get lucky? Well, maybe a little bit of all the above. At the beginning of the 20th century, he writes this novel called Alt Neuland. Alt Neuland in German, Old New Land. It's a novel in which he envisions travelers who are arriving in 1920, 22, after 20 years of not being in the land of Israel, and they arrive to a Jewish state that they just don't recognize. It's an incredible read, all of which, by the way, comes to fruition. That book will be translated to Hebrew, and the Hebrew title of that book will be called Tel Aviv, Old New Land, Archaeological Tel, layer upon layer upon layer of history, and Aviv, springtime, something brand new, something very old and very new, and so Tel Aviv is born. Now, this home, while being a pillar of the city of Tel Aviv, as is Rothschild Boulevard, the antithesis of what could be found in Jaffa or even in Neve Tzedek, would be in fact the pillar of that changed community that would grow into what became the vibrancy and the vibrant community of Tel Aviv. This home in the 1930s will be donated by Mayor Dizengoff to the city of Tel Aviv to become the first art museum of Tel Aviv in the aftermath of the death of his wife, his beloved wife, Tzina. And they had no children, and he donated the home to the city of Tel Aviv. But in 1948, in that moment of time, the War of Independence has already begun, and the British are about to leave. There'll be a moment in time in which, once again, this building will play a significant role. In fact, perhaps the most significant role in modern times for the Jewish people. We were a different people before the events that took place in this building, and we will be a different people after the events. And the events are May 14th, 1948. On May 14th, 1948, in that building, we will be transformed when 300 invited guests were brought to this room to witness the birth of the State of Israel. On May 14th, 1948, Friday afternoon, 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion got up on that podium and took his gavel and banged 3 times and began an event that would change the history of the Jewish people. Within 32 minutes, the whole event was over. Ben-Gurion had read the Declaration of Independence, and as though from the heavens, Hatikva, the hope, the national anthem of the State of Israel, came down. I know it sounds very poetic, but there was actually no room for the orchestra, so they stuck him on the second floor. But whether our exodus from Egypt or the declaration that took place in this room, it was exactly that hope, that tikva, which has driven the Jewish people to constantly yearn to return to their homeland as free people. After reading the Declaration of Independence, David Ben-Gurion says, "Long live the State of Israel," and he says this meeting is adjourned. He walks out. He walks out because he knows the War of Independence is going to continue now, shifting from an internal war against the local Arabs who were living in what was previously called Palestine to a war with all of Israel, now the State of Israel's neighbors. A long and powerful story, and yet it was the moment that took place in what is perhaps one of the least impressive looking buildings, in that one of the most impressive moments took place.